A short story by Paul Maclean. The Mystery of Hazel Maclean. Hazel was a hard-working woman who owned the Clean Plate Cafe in Sydney City. She had established the cafe in 1924 with her brother, William, who passed away in 1944, leaving Hazel to run the cafe on her own. In 1964, when Hazel was 60 years old, she found it hard to cook and clean the cafe, so for the first time, she advertised for help. The first person she interviewed was a young boy just out of school. His name was Jim, and she took to him immediately and offered him the job. Jim had left his parents' home in the outback to find a job in the city. He had to experience working in a kitchen first time, but Hazel was soon showing him the ropes. After a few months, Jim's innocence and sweet charm was beginning to win Hazel's heart. She had always wanted a child, but running the cafe took all her life, and she never had time to have a steady relationship with a man. She started to have feelings for Jim, and they were more than maternal. In fact, they were romantic and true. She began to lavish him with gifts, and then spoke to him about starting a business partnership. Even though there was 40 years difference in their age, it never bothered Hazel. So she hired extra staff as she could have more quality time with Jim, who was touched by her generosity. At first, Jim thought that Hazel was just a nice old lady, but after a while, he realized that Hazel was in love with him. Some days she would ask Jim to go for a walk with her by the harbour, and she was becoming very close. One day after work, she asked Jim to stay behind to help her lock up. When everyone was gone, under soft candlelight, she proposed to him. Jim didn't know what to say, but he knew that if he married her, he would become a very wealthy young man. And so, without hesitation, he said yes to her proposal of marriage. The wedding was of considerable local interest at a Sydney Church of England building. On the night of June 21, 1966, Hazel, the only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Maclean, and Jim Armstrong, second son of the Armstrongs from the small farm in far north Queensland, were wed. The church was decorated by some of Hazel's business friends, and she was escorted by the bank manager who had handled her account for many years. Hazel walked up the aisle of the church, dressed in a beautiful gown of silken fitted bodice with a heart-shaped neckline, with a full skirt and a full-length train. John Barnes, a family friend of the groom's father, attended as best man. During the singing of the register, many people sat back and watched the beautiful couple as they wrote their names into the register. A soprano registered her solo, "You'll Never Walk Alone," and an organist that was hired for the day accompanied her on the keys. Next day, there was a wedding breakfast that was held at the Clean Plate Cafe, and afterwards the newlyweds cut out for their special address to the people sharing wedding cake that held pride of place on a centre table in the middle of the cafe, and toasts were made in their honour. And this beautiful couple then had left for their honeymoon on a 3-week cruise. Hazel never returned after the cruise, and Jim had to explain how she accidentally had fallen overboard one night after one or too many drinks. Her body was never recovered, and in 1968 Jim inherited Hazel's fortune as well as collecting a large amount of money from the life insurance policy Hazel had, and Jim was the only benefactor. In 1970, Jim sold the Clean Plate Cafe for a 6-figure amount and set up a wholesale supermarket chain selling goods to small business owners. In 1972, Hazel's body had emerged strangely 4 miles from Sydney Harbour, and there wasn't a sign of decomposition anywhere on her body. Jim was told that her body would be placed into a special glass case for further observation and investigation. When told of the news, he went into a state of shock and retreated into seclusion to his North Shore mansion. Local people had mentioned that they had heard strange noises coming from the large mansion where Jim had lived alone. There were reports of a ghostly woman wearing a white wedding dress walking around the grounds at night. Most importantly, before Jim had committed suicide, he had left all of his wealth to a girls' private school, where his wife Hazel had once been educated as a young girl. The school had no idea why this very generous donation had come their way, but they were very grateful of the monies received. No one understood why Jim's body looked so old when he was found hanging from the flagpole in the garden, and no one could explain why Hazel's body started to decompose after Jim's death. In June 1984, a young lady by the name of Hazel Maclean made the headlines after she married a very wealthy Sydney businessman. There were 40 years difference in their age, but no one seemed to care about that. They lived together happily for many years until he died, leaving his entire estate to Hazel. It was strange how over the years Hazel never seemed to show any signs of aging. Her face seemed as young as it ever was. Some say that it was her money and plastic surgery that kept her young looking. Others said it must have been her secret daughter taking her place, who kept a very low profile. But in any case, Hazel remained youthful and was rarely seen in public. Sydney's best-known recluse ran a large chain of restaurants on her own. She is still regarded as a mystery woman and an inspiration for others who want to be in the world but never seen. The end.